Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. It is election night in a few small parts of America. Voters in New Jersey and Virginia elect their next governor tonight. In New York City, voters decide whether Bill de Blasio deserves a second term as mayor. De Blasio remarkably seems certain to win there. Democrat Phil Murphy heavily favored in the state of New Jersey. So all eyes are on Virginia tonight, where Republican Ed Gillespie is in a dogfight to the finish with Democrat Ralph Northam. Polls have closed exactly an hour ago. Our Fox News voter analysis shows the race as too close to call. There are some competing impulses in the Commonwealth of Virginia tonight. Voter analysis by Fox shows that 63% of voters say the state's economy is excellent or good, and that would seem to favor the Democrats, who have been in power for the last 4 years. On the other hand, 63% of voters also say they support keeping up Confederate statues. That's been a big issue in the race in the last several months. President Trump, of course, looms large over the race. 56% of voters view him unfavorably in Virginia. But 62% say President Trump was not an important part of their vote one way or the other. So in some ways, competing responses from that survey that we did. Fox correspondent Kristen Fisher is at the Northam campaign's election watch party, and she joins us tonight with an update. Hey, Kristen.
Hey, Tucker. Well, Northam supporters are just starting to trickle in. They like what they're seeing in the polls. He's got a few-point lead at the moment, but as you said, it's too close to call, and that is making them very, very nervous, especially since he came into this race expected to win. But in the closing days of this campaign, his opponent, Ed Gillespie, has been keeping it very, very close. And without a doubt, this is the most important race since Election Day 2016. And that, of course, the memory of that upset also has some Democrats here very, very nervous. If Northam wins, this will be the first major win for a Democrat since that election day. But if Gillespie wins, not only would it be an upset, but it would prove that a Republican can win using Trump's politics without actually campaigning alongside him, because President Trump has been very unpopular here. This is a state that Hillary Clinton won by 5 points. It is the only southern state that President Trump lost. So Northam has really been trying to use that to his advantage. He's been trying to tie Ed Gillespie to President Trump as much as possible. And President Obama obviously campaigned alongside him. But Ed Gillespie has really been able to use some of President Trump's core politics, things like immigration, crime. He's been using those things, taking what was successful for President Trump, but actually not campaigning alongside him. And if he wins, that could very well be a playbook for other Republicans going forward, even though President Trump has continued to tweet his support for Ed Gillespie, tweeted about him 3 times just this morning. But, this is the first time since President Nixon that a sitting president has not campaigned in a Virginia governor's race. That just goes to show you how unpopular President Trump is here, especially in Northern Virginia, which has been turning increasingly blue over recent years. So again, Tucker, this race still too close to call. Democrats like what they see. The outgoing Democratic Governor Terry McAuliffe just said that he's very optimistic. He likes the voter turnout that he's seeing. But again, a lot of folks here very nervous. And then you also have this other race, another governor's race up in New Jersey, Tucker, and this one is a lot less, far less close than the one here in Virginia. It pits Democrat Phil Murphy against Republican Kim Guadagno. Murphy's a former Goldman Sachs executive. Guadagno spent the last 8 years as Chris Christie's lieutenant governor. He's very unpopular there. So the Democrat expected to pull out a win in New Jersey. We'll see about what happens here in Virginia, though, Tucker. It's close.
Kristen Fisher, thanks for that. For analysis on what all of this might mean, we're joined by Fox senior political analyst Brit Hume. Brit, thanks for coming on. So, we have no idea what's going to happen, but some of the turnout in the northern part of the state around Washington, heavily government workers, is very high, and apparently in some precincts higher than it was in last year's presidential election. That's probably bad news for the Gillespie campaign.
Particularly it was certainly higher than it was in 2013, the last time there was one of these gubernatorial midterms, or off-year, I should say, elections. And it looks good up in that part of the country for Northern, and I would say, Tucker, that he's expected to win in that part of the state. and win
Yeah.
handily. But if he wins really big, it will be a very good sign for his campaign and perhaps a bad sign for Ed Gillespie. Although Gillespie, as has been widely noted, did close in the closing days of a campaign in which he had long been the underdog. He led in a couple of polls, but the average of polls throughout showed him trailing, and he's clearly the underdog.
So this wasn't a normal campaign in that national issues seemed to dominate, not just the president, but questions like immigration were right at the center of it. So what would the lessons that each party would take away from this contest?
Well, certainly the campaign was very much affected not by Trump himself, because he didn't really campaign in Virginia, but by his presence in the White House. And the Democratic candidate Ralph Northam did campaign hard against Trump, and did his best in the campaign to tie Ed Gillespie to Trump. Gillespie, on the other hand, was in a situation where he didn't have Trump campaign with him. He was never seen with him, but obviously he wanted Trump voters to turn out for him. And Trump did end up, making robocalls, as you no doubt heard, on Gillespie's behalf and endorsing him. So he was trying to kind of have it both ways, and it was a difficult balancing act for him. If he were to win, it would be extraordinary that he was able to pull that off.
So in the last 3 weeks, the single most controversial thing that happened, an ad run by allies of the Northam campaign that showed a pickup truck, there it is right there, with a Gillespie sticker on it, trying to murder minority children. Maybe the most over-the-top ad I've ever seen in any race. I wonder if Northam were to win, are we going to see more ads like this? Well, does it prove that this technique, scaring people on racial fears, works?
That was so universally criticized, Tucker, that I doubt it. The ad was clearly over the top. I don't think it was effective on Northam's behalf at all. If anything, it probably helped Gillespie. Look, these campaigns can get rough. This one did. Ed Gillespie's a pretty mild-mannered guy. His Democratic opponent seems to be the same, and yet it got quite rough. And we had MS-13 gangs being dragged into it. We had sanctuary cities as an issue in the race, even though there aren't any in Virginia. These social issues, these hot-button issues, got dragged into the race, and it got pretty rough. The ad that you described was the single roughest of all, and it was so bad, I think, that it backfired to the extent that it had any real effect at all.
So let's say Gillespie loses. The message to Republicans in other states in the midterm next year is what? Run on Trump's issues or avoid Trump's issues?
I don't know that well, it depends. If he loses badly, which I don't think will happen, if he loses badly, that might provoke the kind of soul-searching you're talking about. But let's be clear about this. Virginia's gotten to be a pretty blue state.
Yes.
And it's also the political gravity in a president's first term, off-year election like this, is almost always with the out party where the White House is concerned. So in addition to the Virginia growing ever bluer, you had that gravity also, president's first term in the White House working against Gillespie. So he had a lot going against him. He ran, I think, what people thought was a pretty good race. I don't think they'll take a lot away from it. If Gillespie somehow pulls this out, then it seems to me that poses far bigger questions for the Democratic Party than a Gillespie loss would pose for the Republicans.
Yes, they'll melt down entirely. If he were to lose this race, that would be, I don't know what would happen. Brit Hume, thank you.
You bet, Tucker.
The left, as always, says that the Sutherland Springs shootings and all shootings show the need to pass new laws restricting gun rights among the population. Is that the real lesson here? We have our doubts. And we'll continue to monitor, of course, the latest results from the states of Virginia and New Jersey tonight. It's election night, and we are on it. It is election day in the state of Virginia, the most closely watched race of this year. Ralph Northam, physician, VMI graduate, Democrat, at this hour, 58% reporting. He is at 51%. Ed Gillespie, former Republican Party head, he is at 48%. Numerically, fairly close, but Northam in the lead at this hour. Of course, we're going to bring you the results as we get them minute by minute. We've got breaking news here. Okay, we are now reporting that Ralph Northam has won the Virginia governor's race. Ralph Northam, the Democrat, beating Ed Gillespie with 58% in. We are projecting that he is the winner tonight. So we will bring you more detail on that. And I don't know if we can, Kristen Fisher is live at the Ralph Northam headquarters right now. Kristen, are you there? We're going to get to Kristen Fisher in just a second. I don't think we have official statements from either campaign. But as we just said, we are now declaring or acknowledging the declaration that Ralph Northam is the winner in this race. And it looks like by about 3 points. Kristen Fisher, I think, is standing by at the Northam headquarters in Virginia tonight. Kristen? There she is.
There you have it right there. Big cheers coming out of this crowd of Northam supporters after it's announced that he just won Virginia's race for governor. This is a tremendous relief for Democrats, especially after what happened in 2016. You know, even though Northam was up in the polls, it was close, it was tight, and what happened in 2016 had them very, very concerned that they couldn't trust the polls, and it also, they were very kind of psychologically nervous that they wouldn't be able to pull out a win in a state, even though it's been turning increasingly blue. And this part of Virginia, especially northern Virginia, right on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., has been turning increasingly Democratic in recent years. Hillary Clinton won this state by 5 points. And now Northam has just done the same. You know, voting turnout has been surprisingly high here today, even though it's been a very rainy day. It's also been a non-presidential year, obviously. So despite all of those factors, voter turnout was up. Democrats were hopeful that that would lead to a win for them, and it just did tonight. As for Ed Gillespie, I'd imagine it's a much far less sour and somber scene over at his headquarters tonight. You know, he really came so close, did far better than most people expected him to do. He really tried to tie himself to President Trump's agenda. He campaigned hard on immigration, on crime. He hit his opponent very hard. And in the final days of this campaign, Northam hit back a bit. There was that ad that we've been talking about so much, which wasn't produced by the Northam campaign, but it was produced by a Latino group outside the campaign, which showed a man in a pickup truck with a Gillespie bumper sticker on the back, chasing down minority children. That has led to one of the most bitter elections, the most bitter campaigns in recent memory, Tucker. But tonight, Northam pulled out the win that he needed to win. Back to you.
Kristen Fisher at apparently Governor-elect Northam's headquarters. Thank you very much. We're going to go back to Britt Hume, who's standing by for what this means. I was struck watching this race, Britt, by how little of it was about economics. Typically, governor's races have a lot of tax questions, for example. This one, the Northern campaign, heavily financed by outside spending on guns, on abortion, on immigration, basically on progressive social issues. Is that the template going forward, do you think, for Democrats?
Well, bear this in mind, Tucker, that Ed Gillespie and later on Donald Trump himself tried to make the Virginia economy an issue, but the Virginia economy is pretty good. And, of course, so much of it is dependent on government spending, because you get that whole Hampton Roads area down there, which is military, and then you've got this vast array of suburbs on the Virginia side of Washington, D.C., heavily populated by government workers. The whole Washington, D.C. economy has been largely recession-proof. So the economy was doing pretty well even through the recession, and it has done well since. The never-ending growth of government is good for the Washington, D.C. area economy, and as I say, so much of the Virginia vote comes out of those suburbs there. It's also worth, perhaps, Tucker, discussing how we now know, or believe we know, that Northam has won this race. In addition, of course, we have the exit polls, which suggest that the issue profile tended perhaps to favor him. But in addition, there are about 2 to 3 dozen precincts around the state that, if you get a handle on how they're going, will tell you how the state is going. And one report I just looked at said that there were about 30 they were looking at, and 20 of them had come in, and Northam was leading everywhere. And when you see something like that, that's how a decision desk makes a decision to call a race, which is evidently what we have done here. It looks like that the political gravity, the unpopularity of Donald Trump, and the out year, the fact that this is an off-year election with the first term in office has won this race for Ralph Northam. It would have been a shocker if he hadn't won, but it appears now that he has. An important win for Democrats in Virginia.
Yeah, I think the majority of DNC employees were working on this race. DNC put in over $1 million into it, and then millions spent by outside groups. I just saw our research today showed that Northam won federal employees, as you noted, a huge constituency in Virginia by 17 points. I guess that's probably not too different from the presidential results. But it seemed like turnout, and we'll know much more about this tomorrow when the smoke clears, but it seemed like turnout was profound in Democratic districts. What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I think that. Well, I think that's in considerable measure the Trump factor. Trump stirs passions, and the people who are for him are passionate, and the people who are against him are passionate. In the state of Virginia, remember, he lost Virginia. It's the only southern state he lost, really. So, you think about that. This is not, Virginia really isn't Trump country, and an aroused electorate in Virginia is going to be bad news for a Republican running in the age of Trump.
It's hard to see Ed Gillespie as a Trump candidate. I know there are a lot of stories in the last week about how he is running on the Trump template, but I think of Ed Gillespie as we ran the Republican Party, not a party that was pretty hostile to Trump. Going forward, again, the question for the midterms is what lesson do Republicans draw from this? And it seems like it could go either way.
Well, maybe, but I mean, if you look up a mainstream Republican in the dictionary or the encyclopedia, you might find a picture of Ed Gillespie.
Well, exactly.
He is very much he's very much a creature of the Republican Party and a pretty mainstream guy, which is why I think that some of the things, the criticisms that I've seen from him from some on the left, that he's a white supremacist, are patently ridiculous. But that grew out of the fact that he made Confederate statues in his desire to preserve them in place, an issue, and so on, and the MS-13 gang, all of that. Social issues, perhaps, historical issues, but not the mark of a white supremacist. But I think when you look at this, this was not a race that figured very well for the Republicans to win. On the other hand, if you're Donald Trump and you look at this, you think, well, I suppose some Trump supporters will say he didn't give us the 100-proof, full-bore Trump agenda or the Trump platform, but he pretty much did. On the issues, there was much daylight between him and Donald Trump. He didn't personally embrace Trump, but the thing that a lot of people forget here, Tucker, is that when you look at the Republican Party and what it's basically stood for over the last quarter of a century and more, it has been basically the agenda that Trump has embraced as president, the legislative agenda, the regulatory agenda, and the national security agenda. So that's where all this kind of comes out. There's not that much daylight between the Republican Party and Donald Trump, and the question tonight is whether Trump drags the party down, or whether whether members of the party don't get close enough to him to get the updraft. I don't think there's a very good case for an updraft tonight.
I'm just hearing right now the Fox News Decision Desk is projecting that Democrat Phil Murphy will be the next governor of New Jersey. Britt, not at all a surprise there. Chris Christie, probably certainly among the most unpopular governors in the state, and all of our research today on this, in effect, exit polling that we did, suggested that voters were mad at Chris Christie and that anger was informing their voting.
Chris Christie leaves office highly unpopular, deeply unpopular, and look, let's be clear. New Jersey is a bright blue state, so any Republican running in New Jersey is running uphill, and almost any Democrat is running downhill. Downhill wins most of the time.
So, I mean, would you look at these two? I think you probably take New Jersey off the map because it's, as you said, it's a historically Democratic state and it had a historically unpopular governor. But the Virginia contest seemed a more ideological contest. Is that something, looking at it, if you were running the Republican Party, that would make you nervous about the coming midterms?
Well, to the extent that Donald Trump's unpopularity in Virginia, which was pretty strong, his approval rating was, it's not the worst it is anywhere, but he was way underwater in Virginia, down in the 40s, I guess, and of course nationally he's down in the high 30s, according to most of the polls. That's what has to worry you going into next year. Is, you know, you've got an unpopular president. Unpopular presidents are always a drag on the incumbent party ticket in a midterm election. That is likely to be true next year. Many people say, you know, in polls, you ask these questions about the things he's for, the agenda he's for. The agenda items do better than he does. So you look into the next year and you hope, for example, that they can get tax reform and tax cut passed. You hope they may be able to recover in some measure on Obamacare if you're a Republican. But you worry about the fact that legislatively there's not been a lot of big achievements. There have been a lot of little ones on regulations, which are not inconsequential, but they're not the kind of things that catch voters' eyes necessarily. And you look at his personal unpopularity, and you know you may be dragging a big heavy weight into the 2018 midterms with control of both House and Senate at stake. So it's obviously worrisome to the extent that this race looks like it was badly affected from the Republican standpoint by Donald Trump. You'd be worried about that.
I spoke to a member of Republican leadership recently who said if we don't get this tax bill through and signed, we can kiss our majority goodbye. Hard for me to know whether that was overstatement or not. Do you think that? Do you think that this tax plan is pivotal to Republicans keeping the majority?
Well, here's the way I would look at that, Tucker. Taxes are perhaps the signature Republican domestic issue.
Right.
If they fail on that, then what's the rationale for them? That's the signature issue. If you're a Trump voter and you think he's doing a good job and you think his agenda is the one and his party fails to pass it, that's what leads to the perception that Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell are the problem and ought to be got rid of. So that's a chunkier base that falls away from you if you're a Republican, right? And if you are a mainstream Republican and you see that under Trump's leadership you couldn't get that signature issue in place, that signature promise kept, then you're disaffected as well. So that's a double whammy, really, if you think about it, against the Republicans. They cannot, in political terms, they can't afford to fail on this. And of course, they're so fractious these days. Now you got people coming out all over the place saying they can't support it. You know, Jim Lankford, who's a pretty steady customer as a Republican senator from Oklahoma, pretty conservative. He's complaining about that it's going to add to the deficit and so on. And of course, you got the never-ending claims of Democrats that no matter how you structure it, they're going to say that it's a tax cut that favors the rich. Well, that can be a telling issue. Since the rich pay most of the taxes, it's pretty hard to cut them without helping the rich. But that's a political reality Republicans have been dealing with for a long time. They need to deal with it this time too.
Brit Hume, thank you for that.
You bet, Tucker.
As you can see from our screen, reporting that the Democrat, Ralph Northam, has just won the Virginia governor's race. The Democrat has also won in the state of New Jersey. We're assuming that Bill de Blasio remains mayor of New York. We'll have updates on all of that throughout the hour. David Frum of The Atlantic magazine is an unbelievably smart guy, probably one of the smartest people in Washington, way smarter than you are. So smart, he qualifies as a wonk, which is another way of saying that David Frum understands policy details you never dreamed existed. He's an expert. So naturally, when Devin Kelly murdered 26 people in a Texas church over the weekend, David Frum came forward almost immediately with a tidy solution to mass shootings like this one. Frum shared it, as wonks tend to, on Twitter. Quote, "Crazy thought. Lifetime gun ban for anyone who raises a hand against a woman or a child." End quote. Wow. Wow, that's brilliant. So brilliant that it's been federal law for 21 years. Good job, David Frum, though you're a little late to the policymaking party. Under existing statute, Devin Kelley was not allowed to buy the gun he used. Kelley had been convicted of brutally abusing his wife and infant stepson and received a bad conduct discharge from the Air Force for doing it. Even before that, before his conviction, Kelley had escaped from a mental hospital. All of that clearly disqualified him from purchasing firearms. Unfortunately, incompetent government clerks did not supply that information to the correct federal database. The laws were on the books. The bureaucracy botched it. So what are the lessons of all of this? That the NRA has too much power? That's what they're telling you on cable news and at congressional press conferences this week. But wait, Devin Kelley wasn't an NRA member. The armed citizen who stopped him was. He'd been trained by the NRA in marksmanship and gun safety, and thank God for that. So maybe there's another lesson here. At every turn, the people who claim they will protect you failed. They didn't stop Devin Kelley. They let him buy a gun. Instead, the hero of this story is a middle-aged plumber named Stephen Williford. He ignored basic human instinct and ran toward the sound of gunfire to save people. Williford, by the way, was armed with an AR-15. That's exactly the sort of rifle we've been told must be banned for our sake, to keep us safe. Yet Williford shot the murderer twice with that rifle and later chased him in a car until Kelley ran off the road. Only after the rampage was over did the police arrive, and by that point, Kelley was dead. It's an amazing story, but it's not exceptional. About 70% of mass shootings end within 5 minutes. The average police response time, by contrast, 11 minutes. And yet, for some reason, the usual establishment mouthpieces are still giving us the same stupid instructions in case of emergency. Take cover and call authorities. No thanks. It's pretty clear that doesn't work. Now, we're not attacking the police, by the way. We're just acknowledging what's obviously true. Cops can't be everywhere. When things fall apart, you are on your own. Your safety is your responsibility. That's the iron law of life. It never changes. So why is the modern left still telling us that we have no right to protect ourselves? Why are people who have taxpayer-funded bodyguards demanding that the rest of us disarm immediately? We could speculate about motive, but what's the point? They're either lying or they're stupid. It doesn't matter. Either way, they are wrong. Ignore them. Mark Glaze, the former executive director of Everytown for Gun Safety, and he joins us tonight. Mark, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
In addition to being a horrifying tragedy, the shooting on Sunday seems to blow up every basic assumption of gun control. So it was the government that allowed this to happen. Existing gun laws would have stopped this, but they weren't enforced because the bureaucracy is incompetent. And the only person who rode to the rescue is a private citizen armed with a gun that you guys would like to ban. So why doesn't this make you rethink your life's work?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad that guy was there. I think everybody ought to stipulate that it was good that a good guy with a gun happened to stop this guy. But there have been 377 mass shootings this year in the United States. Right. A good guy generally is not there. Plus, if you ask police chiefs whether it makes sense to have more guns in a shootout rather than fewer, almost inevitably, even if there's a good guy with a gun, it's civilians that they end up shooting because these are confusing situations. Harder for everybody to get assault weapons than it is to rely on a good guy.
It would be interesting for you guys to do, I know you'd never do this, but to do an analysis of accidental shootings by police departments. They're very, very common, and people are injured by them. Right, it is true. I've seen the numbers. But it doesn't change the core facts, which are these, and I just said them. In the average mass shooting, 70% of mass shootings last 5 minutes. The average police response time is more than twice that. It's not an attack on the police, it's just there aren't that many police in this country.
Right.
So asking the average person to put his life or his family's lives at the mercy of law enforcement, wait for law enforcement to come, is insane.
Well, look, I think you would concede that we basically have a choice here. You can arm everybody in the hopes that we'll shoot them out and the good guys ultimately will win more often than they lose, or you can address the fact that this doesn't happen in any other industrialized country in the world, and it's because we go upstream to the problem and make guns really hard to get. I would rather do the latter.
But it's actually not, I mean, that's a huge assumption, as we've discussed many times, and as Angus King, the liberal senator from Maine, explained today on television, there are plenty of places with enormously high rates of gun ownership with basically no violent crime, and Maine is one of them, Wyoming's another. So I don't accept your premise, but the truth is we don't have a choice because we have millions upon tens of millions, hundreds of millions of firearms in this country, and unless we take them away, and I assume you're not proposing that because you get a civil war in about 20 minutes, you have to deal with the reality of the existence of those firearms, period, don't you?
I do, and that's kind of the argument the NRA makes, which I think is a little bit ironic. They created a culture in which guns are celebrated.
Who cares about the NRA? I'm saying I'm not here on behalf of the NRA. I'm just saying that's a true point.
Yeah, but it's
so, what's the answer?
It's ironic to create a situation in which there are that many guns out there.
It's like the NRA. It's just a talking point. What do you do about the fact there are hundreds of millions of weapons? Do you want to take them away? Simple question.
I think we ought to do what Australia did.
Take them away?
I think we ought to basically have the government buy them back.
But not buy them back. It took them away.
Well, they were required to buy them back, but they did
we're
require
unfortunately out of time. I wish we'd started with this. How long would it take before there was a civil war in this country? For real?
I think that's overstated.
No, but you think there wouldn't be widespread violence if the government tried to take people's guns away?
I actually don't. I think most people would be good citizens and say, let's save lives.
Good citizens, yeah. Good citizens. Comply, obey, or you're not a good citizen. Yeah. Whoa. We got to do. I hope you'll come back.
Of course.
Thank you for being honest enough to admit your real agenda. I appreciate that. Authorities in New York preparing a possible criminal case against Harvey Weinstein. Will tell you what they're thinking of charging him with and assess the odds of him behind bars. We'll also continue to give you the latest results and numbers from the states of Virginia and New Jersey and other races around the country. Stay tuned. This is a Fox News alert. Disgraced film producer Harvey Weinstein could be facing criminal charges in New York for allegedly raping actress Paz de la Huerta. The Manhattan District Attorney reportedly expected to present the Weinstein case to a grand jury as soon as next week. Trace Gallagher is here with details. Hey, Trace.
Hi, Tucker. Manhattan DA Cy Vance decided to seek an indictment against Weinstein after New York police interviewed Paz de la Huerta and corroborated a number of details in her story. De la Huerta claims Harvey Weinstein raped her on 2 occasions. Cy Vance previously came under fire for not pursuing a different case against Weinstein in 2015, saying he lacked evidence. And now Ronan Farrow, who broke one of the initial stories about the allegations against Weinstein, has new reporting on what he calls, quote, the machine that was so instrumental in keeping this quiet as long as it was quiet. The article goes into great detail about the Operation Weinstein Commission to silence his accusers and suppress stories about the alleged abuse, saying Weinstein hired both an investigations and risk consulting firm in Manhattan and an Israeli intelligence firm to, in effect, bully people out of going public. One of those people is actress Rose McGowan, who accused Weinstein of rape. McGowan claims Weinstein's army of private investigators tried to dig up dirt on the backgrounds and sexual histories of her and several other women. McGowan also claims that an agent for one of the firms hired by Weinstein duped her into several private meetings by posing as a woman's rights advocate. The story also alleges that Weinstein tried to hide his operation by routing contracts with the various firms through his team of lawyers, including that man, legendary attorney David Boies, who represented Al Gore during the litigation of the 2000 presidential election. The article claims that by routing the contracts through attorneys, the investigation could potentially be protected by attorney-client privilege. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, a remarkable story. Thanks for that. Aaron Filler is a lawyer representing Paz de la Huerta and joins us tonight. Aaron, thanks for coming on.
Good evening.
So, tell us what you're alleging on behalf of your client.
Well, there are 2 rapes, and these are forcible, non-consented, actual rapes.
Was there ever a settlement between your client and Harvey Weinstein? Did she at any point sign any a document of any kind saying that this didn't happen?
No, there's no contact. Basically, after the second rape, December of 2010, there was no more contact. She heard what was going on this month, Jodi Kantor's story in the New York Times, right. And she's thought about talking about this before, and this convinced her to go forward.
So, can you explain the circumstances of the assaults that she alleges?
So she has known Harvey Weinstein, had known Harvey Weinstein for a long time because in Cider House Rules at age 14, he was the producer. So and this happened when she was about 25. The first rape occurred when she essentially ran into him at a club. He offered her a ride home because they're neighbors in Tribeca, and began trying to insist on coming up to her room. They argued a bit in the lobby, and as you've heard on The Wire with Gutierrez from 2015, saying, look, you're embarrassing me, let's talk in your room. And once he was in the room, this rape occurred.
Okay, and that,
as for the second...
Yes.
So, so during the days and weeks following this, he made contacts trying to get her again to meet him. He would say he's parked in front of her home, he's in the lobby, and she was really increasingly terrified and afraid to come home. Finally, on December 23rd, 2010, the second episode, she was at a photo shoot. She got this call, again, him saying he's not going to leave till she comes home, and she determined to go confront him. And I know her well. I've worked on various projects with her over the past 5 years. She's a very determined person who believes reasonably she can go to a person like Weinstein and confront him and tell him he's being a stalker, he's a rapist, and he needs to leave. She did go home. She did drink on the way home because she was very anxious, and again met him in the lobby, commenced having this discussion. He again insisted, please, can we go upstairs? Then her plan was to have this argument in the lobby. In the hallway of her, outside her apartment.
Right, I guess. So she would have
into the apartment.
But where were the police in all of this? And by the way, I'm not doubting the story, but I'm just confused as to how someone could commit 2 felony rapes and never wind up in jail. This is 7 years ago. So why were charges never filed? Or the police not on this?
Well, right from the beginning, she was very worried about a career impact. She did discuss the rape, but used a code name for him. But she did not choose to report it. She did not. She felt that it would be very difficult to succeed, and
I know, but I'm sorry. Look, I feel sorry for her, but lots of other people were abused subsequent to that. So doesn't she kind of regret, in effect, protecting the man who assaulted her?
Well, I can't speak for her on that particular question.
Okay. Well, the whole thing is a shame. Thank you very much for explaining that. I appreciate it. Well, of course, the press love a scandal, yet weirdly, they've done their best to downplay Donna Brazil's revelations about the Democratic National Committee. Up next, we'll talk to a journalist who has exposed some of the fraudulent coverage of all of this. We'll also continue to provide latest results from across the country on what looks like a good night for Democrats in New Jersey and Virginia. We'll be back. Last night, we reported that top executives at CNN were offended by former DNC chair Donna Brazil's criticism of Hillary Clinton and were shaping coverage of Brazil and her book accordingly. What we told you was true was yet another example of CNN's agenda-driven approach to the news. Well, CNN executives were apparently watching last night because today they issued statements to a number of different publications denying our reporting. Never happened, they said. Okay. Let's see if CNN will deny this. Last Thursday, Donna Brazil ran a book excerpt in Politico magazine. She described how the Hillary Clinton campaign basically took over the DNC during the Democratic primaries. The next day, which was last Friday, CNN chief Jeff Zucker held a conference call with some of his senior programming staff. He had seen Brazil's Politico piece and, according to a very good source, was, quote, fuming and enraged. Brazil is a liar, he said, and suggested that CNN's news show should demonstrate that she is. At least one participant on that call described plans to have Donna Brazil on CNN. And in fact, CNN producers did try to book Donna Brazil. So far, she has not appeared on the network. That's all factual. We await CNN's denial of any of it. Donna Brazil, by the way, will appear on this show tomorrow night. Glenn Greenwald has been covering the press handling of the Brazil story over at The Intercept, and he joins us tonight. Glenn, I'm not a Democrat, so I can approach this in a pretty non-emotional way, but I'm watching people cover this story, by contrast, very emotionally, and it feels like they've got a vested interest in a certain storyline. You know much more about this than I. You wrote a great piece on this. Tell us what's going on here.
Well, they have a massive vested interest. Any of these journalists who pretend to be neutral but who are actually loyal to the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Party as their overarching worldview, this is incredibly devastating for them. For one of their most loyal operatives, an African-American woman at the highest level of party politics for 30 years, comes out and says that the process of choosing their candidate was rigged, that there was smoking gun evidence that she discovered in the form of an agreement that gave control of the DNC to Hillary Clinton before the primary even began, and that she was horrified by what she called this internal corruption. So if you're a Democrat, how do you respond to that? It's very difficult. None of their smear tactics work against Donna Brazile, and what they decided to do was manufacture a whole series of lies about what this contract actually said and didn't say, and then fed it to their favorite journalists at MSNBC, CNN, and online, all of whom blindly endorsed these outright falsehoods. It was really shameful and extraordinary conduct on the part of these journalists.
What's so interesting, though, is you'd think of journalists as identifying instinctively with the underdog, who in this case obviously was Bernie Sanders, and yet they don't. And again, I'm looking at this from outside, but I watched them sort of dismiss Sanders, who got, 40-odd% of the vote, as this buffoon and kind of a speed bump on Hillary's rightful path to the presidency. Why do they identify with Hillary over him?
I mean, Hillary Clinton is the establishment figure in the Democratic Party, and if you identify with the Democratic Party as opposed to being a leftist or some kind of an ideologue or just somebody who wants to radically change the political culture and the political system, Hillary Clinton is going to be somebody you're going to swear your fealty to. I personally don't mind that these journalists adore Democratic Party establishment leaders. I think they have the right to have that as their cause. I think journalists ought to have opinions, but what I think is really offensive are two things. Number one, when they pretend that they don't have opinions, that they're really neutral, and they conceal and therefore deceive what their true allegiances are. And then secondly, when they're willing to endorse outright factual falsehoods in order to serve their hidden political agenda. I mean, there's no worse crime that you can commit in journalism than doing that, and that's what so many of them did all week long.
That's exactly right. That's why Rachel Maddow doesn't bother me at all. I like Rachel Maddow. She's not lying to me. She says who she is. But you watch CNN and they're lying about it. It drives me insane. Glenn Greenwald, you are a brave man and a very precise one. I appreciate your coming on. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
We're not done with this story. Tomorrow night, we're going to sit down with Donna Brazile herself to talk about her new book. I think it's her first appearance on cable. She's got remarkable claims in there. We have it, and we're going to have quite a conversation with her, so stay tuned. A professor, meanwhile, says mass shootings and terrorism aren't the result of evil ideologies or mental illness, but instead something called toxic masculinity. Is it hurting you? Democrats, by the way, have captured New Jersey's governor's mansion. A Goldman Sachs guy won. Goldman Sachs runs everything these days, apparently, and they have held on to the State House in Virginia. We have the latest results from both states and in other races around the country. Stay tuned. This is a Fox News alert. Democratic victories tonight in the states of Virginia and New Jersey. Ralph Northam, a physician, the next governor of Virginia, beating Ed Gillespie, former head of the Republican Party. Philip Murphy, formerly of Goldman Sachs, replaces Chris Christie after easily defeating the Republican candidate. Democrats also made significant gains in the Virginia House of Delegates tonight. Could take control of that chamber. We're not exactly sure yet, but we'll tell you when we know. Polls about to close in New York. Democrats expected to win another victory by easily re-electing Mayor Bill de Blasio for reasons that aren't clear. President Trump, meanwhile, tweeted this: Ed Gillespie worked hard but did not embrace me or what I stand for. Don't forget, Republicans won 4 out of 4 House seats, and with the economy doing record numbers, we will continue to win even bigger than before! Exclamation point. Of course, we'll continue to follow the latest election results throughout the night right here on the Fox News channel. We ran out of time. Unfortunately, we'll talk about toxic masculinity tomorrow with a professor who says it's killing everyone. An amazing story. Be sure to tune in tomorrow night. Obviously, Donna Brazile here also. Sean Hannity next. Our coverage continues throughout the night.
All right, thanks.